Hello YouTube. Some of the unsolved mysteries of the war that ended in 1945 still are as dangerous today as they were at the time when Nazi Germany was crushed. Treasures, lost files, prototypes of secret weapons and more. Today I will tell you about two mysteries that still pose dangers to those who seek answers in an old city, which is modern Russia's westernmost military citadel facing NATO. And the city is Koenigsberg. And this is the former name of the city we know today as Kaliningrad, which is an icy free port city situated on the Baltic Sea coast, the farthest western corner of modern Russia. It was founded by Teutonic Knights when they spread eastward during the 13th century. Ever since its foundation, Koenigsberg has been a city of paradoxes and enigmas. The Knights were planning to build a city about 200 kilometers to the east, at the Neman River. During their rest stop at a mountain that contained a hidden place of worship, the Knights observed a solar eclipse. The Teutonic Order's magisters considered the phenomenon to be a sign from God and decided not to disobey it. The mountain later became known as Koenigsberg, or Royal Mountain. In 1255, the main castle of Koenigsberg was founded on the bank of the Pregel River. The city was essentially built as a fortress complex. A ring of 15 fortresses that are believed to be united by an underground tunnels surrounds it. Formerly the capital of the Dukes of Prussia and later the capital of East Prussia, the city was given to the Soviet Union in 1945 under the Potsdam Agreement. After all, in June of 1945, this city was used as a staging ground for one of the main assault zones against Soviet Russia, and remained a very important German naval base for the duration of the war. Over 100,000 Soviet soldiers lost their lives in the operation to take over the city, and over 90,000 German troops were taken prisoners. In 1946, the area was sealed off from the other parts of the Soviet Union and became a vital military outpost. Many monuments were brought down by orders of the Communist Party. Many secrets came along with the occupation. An ugly house of Soviets replaced the ruins of Koenigsberg Castle that remained in the center of the city and were finally removed 20 years later. After the war, people from all over the Soviet Union settled the land and forged a somewhat separate identity from other Russians. When the city was part of the Nazi Reich, it was under the control of Erich Koch. He was a governor of the Nazi-occupied territories and mass murderer. Erich Koch's treatment of the people living in the territories was cruel, and his aim was to put into effect ideas and instructions of Hitler and Himmler. After the war, Koch was hiding from justice under a false name. In 1959, he was found and sentenced to death. Due to his bad health, he was kept in prison until he died in 1986. Koch took a number of secrets to his grave. When Erich Koch was dying in 1986, it was reported that he said, "Where lies my treasure, there also lies the Amber Room." One of the great unsolved mysteries of the Second World War is probably hidden somewhere in the Kaliningrad region. Originally constructed in the 18th century in Prussia, the Amber Room disappeared during World War II. Before the room was lost, it was considered to be eighth wonder of the world. Янтарная комната, the Amber Room, that's how we say it in Russian, was built as Frederick's first study at Koenigsberg Castle in 1711. 5 years later, it was given as a present to Peter the Great to commemorate Prussia's alliance with Russia. It was later installed in Catherine's palace at the Tsarskое Selo, the former opulent summer residence of the Russian royal family. When the German armies besieged Leningrad during the Second World War, they dismantled the famous Amber Room from the Catherine Palace just outside the city. The desperate Soviets attempted to hide the Amber Room by wallpapering over it. It took 6 men 36 hours to dismantle the room and pack it in 28 crates. Soon after the Amber Room was seized, the Nazis sent it to the West by special train. The Amber Room covered 1,800 square feet and consisted of handcrafted panels made of 6 tons of amber. Amber is the lightest gem in the world. There were also Italian mosaics decorated with diamonds, emeralds, and rubies. It is often referred to as the 8th wonder of the world. To repeat, people believe that it possessed some magical energy, as if glowing from within the amber. There is a belief in the Baltics that amber has miraculous healing powers and is referred to as northern gold or sun-drenched stone. The Amber Room was taken back by Nazis to Koenigsberg Castle, and the room was displayed in one of the halls of the Koenigsberg Museum. However, just before the capitulation of the city, the Germans once again dismantled the room, packed it in crates, and intended to ship it back to Berlin. It has never been seen since. For 5 decades, the KGB, the Stasi, East German secret police, and unknown other entities have failed in their search for the room. The hunt for the collection of jewel-encrusted panels that make up the Amber Room has been a little known and quite dangerous post-war quest. People have died and disappeared. People who came too close to it. Vera Brusova, widow of a noted Soviet archaeologist charged to look for the treasure, revealed that her husband Alexander wrote a memo to the Soviet leadership back in 1955, and he stated that, "I do not believe the treasure is lost." There have been many speculations as to what had happened to it, and some people are convinced that the diligent quest has brought death and misfortune to those involved. It's the so-called curse of the Amber Room, but it is still a mystery of greatest of the missing treasures of Europe. Russian newspapers reported some years ago that a Soviet team charged with finding the Amber Room secretly petitioned Moscow in 1984. They asked why their team was prevented from freely investigating the fate of the room, complaining that the Soviet military and the KGB had hampered it. And then there was a general of the Russian intelligence, known by his last name Gusev, who reportedly died in a mysterious automobile accident after he talked to a newspaper reporter about the Amber Room. Very little is known about this incident. Some believe that the Amber Room perished in a fire when a Soviet bomb hit the Koenigsberg Castle in the 1945 Soviet Army offensive. Some credible witnesses, such as Leonid Arenstein, a former World War II veteran and an advisor to the Russian Cultural Fund president, such people believe that Koenigsberg had been set on fire before the city was captured, because the British, and also American according to him, warplanes bombed the outskirts of the city. The castle started burning on the 2nd or 3rd day after the city had been captured. And I will talk about the reason why the Allies would want to bomb the city, why it was a special target, but it's a little bit later. Now, a German caretaker who was there on April 8th told Arenstein that the Amber Room's panels packed in boxes were kept in the basement of the castle. The Red Army had no reason to set its country's newly recovered treasures on fire. That means that some other force, perhaps a Nazi underground group, an agile, deadly and swift underground force, was carrying out orders of the Reich. The Red Army engaged in a fierce, deadly battle to capture a city protected by the complex fortress system, and did not control the situation yet. The fire was spreading from the outskirts to the center of the city. Soviet troops were exhausted after month-old battles in Prussia. German forces were fighting in the port area, and almost all of the population was evacuated. Entire streets and city quarters were burning, and it was a lawless city. Whatever group is still interested in concealing the knowledge about the Amber's room location, its operatives are quite effective. So let's look at this deadly quest. Mysterious deaths attributed to the knowledge about the room include Dr. Alfred Rode. He was in control of the Amber Room as the director of the museum under the Nazi regime. He and his wife died from typhoid the day before their scheduled interrogation by NKVD. That's how the KGB was called at the time. Soviet intelligence officers did not find bodies of the deceased couple. Apparently they opened the tomb in early 1946, but it was empty. Some years ago it was learned from an interview with a Russian naval archaeologist that Dr. Rodi had been able to disappear from the Soviet control for several days and probably left Koenigsberg to check something outside the city. He later returned only to die or disappear forever. Russian researchers believe that he visited the Pillau Castle. This was formerly a German submarine base. Another strange disappearance was that of the doctor who signed the death certificates of the Rodis. In June of 2003, there was a very interesting article published in the Russian magazine Необъявленный Visit in the issue number 3, and it provided more details about Dr. Rodi. The author, Ivan Koltsov, mentioned that Koch also sent looted treasures from the Kiev museums to Koenigsberg. The person entrusted by the Nazi to accompany the shipment was somebody named Polina Kulzhenko. There were a number of valuable icons. It is suspected that Rodi and Kulzhenko were able to hide the treasures not far from the Wildenhof Castle, that's 25 miles south of the city. Dr. Rodi had a green folder with a small map where he marked hidden treasures with secret codes. Koltsov thinks that Rodi's daughter might possess the folder. And then there was Georg Stein, the relentless investigator of the Amber Room's whereabouts. He was found dead and naked in the middle of a forest in Germany, his stomach ripped apart by a scalpel. Stein was a German researcher who helped to deliver to the Soviets hundreds of displaced cultural valuables, Nazi looted treasures. But the Soviets would not allow him to enter the forbidden Kaliningrad region, although he sent them thousands of pages of archives, according to a person who is still doing the quest. And that person was once a military engineering student. And under orders of his superiors, Avenir Ovsyanov and his classmates blew up the remaining ruins of the Koenigsberg castles. He was a young soldier then, and is not at all happy now about his involvement in the whole deal when the castle was exploded. In an interview to Izvestia back in 2003, he mentioned that the ruined castle was finally blown up and demolished in 1968. Ovsyanov, who was the chief of the Department for Search for Cultural Valuables of the Kaliningrad region, revealed very interesting details about 15 years ago. In the summer of 1945, a special team, Brigada in Russian, sent by Soviet government and headed by somebody named Belaeva, was working in Koenigsberg. They found Russian valuables looted by Nazis. Among them were libraries, monographs, crowns, paintings, archaeological collections, and so on. Some items were of local origin too. Apparently, there were also items from the Tsarskaya Selo, another Brigada, sent by the Committee for Arts of the USSR, was also operating in the area, collecting Nazi looted antiques. Two other research teams also worked in the city at the same time. No documents about their activities have been found so far. 60 crates of cultural valuables collected by the Belyeva group remained in Koenigsberg, but no one knows what happened to them. There is some information about plundering that took place. Otherwise, the best remaining sources are diaries and private letters, whoever has them. Other recovered cultural valuables were ultimately withdrawn by the employees of the NKVD, the KGB. From Soviet sources, it is known that the State Security Committee troops, the KGB, had participated in the battles for Koenigsberg. It would be interesting to find out about the Soviet intelligence agents who had worked in the Nazi-controlled Koenigsberg, but the KGB files have been out of reach of even Russian researchers. And because of the passing of time, few, if any, of the actual Soviet spies from the period are still alive. And there are more secrets linked to the area. I ask my audience to look at the video that I made about the Nazi hunt for rare artifacts, crystal skull, in Brazil. According to Leonid Platov, the well-known Soviet thriller novelist, the elusive Nazi submarine that had operated in Brazil was in Pillau. The author had tremendous connections, and his works of fiction most likely were used to convey the information to NATO or to the West that the Soviets possessed valuable information as a warning. Such communication channels were used as needed, I'm positive. In 1967, the Soviet government created a special entity, Commission for the Search of the Amber Room and other museum valuables. It was headquartered in Moscow, and its arm in the Baltics was the Kaliningrad Archaeological Expedition, KGAE. It operated in a forbidden, sealed-off military region, could not get access to many top-secret areas, and it was hampered by bureaucracy, and, as we already learned, by the KGB. The KGAE was itself a secret group, and as such, its work was classified. Geology was most certainly not its top priority. Yet even this group was denied access to the secret archives concerning looted Soviet treasures. According to Ovsyanov, the archives still remain closed, although the Soviet Union is no more. The KGAE was disbanded in 1983. The East German Stasi secret police also had spent years trying to find the room, and actually created a special unit that functioned during the 1970s and 1980s. But the quest continued. The former Soviet architect of Kaliningrad, last name Maximov, recalled that when the Soviets captured the city, they found a freshly flooded well in a western wing of the castle. It sloped downward to great depths. Some believe that this is where the Amber Room was hidden. Russian and German archaeologists who explored the basements of the castle found ancient weapons and jewelry. Ovsyanov, though, points out that prior to the final destruction of the castle in 1968, the basements surely had been visited because they were easily accessible. Now, about the destruction. It was in 1968, and despite academic protests and outcry worldwide, Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev ordered the destruction of Koenigsberg Castle. Not much else is known, but apparently he was the one that gave the permission. Another possible location of the Amber Room may be in the subterranean vaults of the old Pillau or Baltisk, as known today, castle. It is quite possible that Dr. Rodi was here when he evaded the NKVD. or the KGB. Former Pillau, the main base of the Russian Baltic Navy now, is located to the west from Kaliningrad. The vaults had been sealed off in the 1940s after the Soviets learned that German troops had filled the area with explosives and mines. Not wanting to risk their people, local commanders decided to shut off the vaults. This was an eerie location because the Nazis had used it as their military headquarters for the defense of Pillau. When the Red Army troops broke their resistance and entered the castle, not a single German officer was found. They used secret passages to escape the fortress. The area was then used for a top-secret Soviet naval base. When the Soviet officers tried to reach the vaults, their metal detectors sent warning signals about presence of mines, and flashlights illuminated rows upon rows of well-stacked ammunition. After the war, the castle could be entered with special military passes only. Curiously, when Russian investigators worked in Berlin some years ago, looking through German archives for information, they found some glaring omissions about Pillau. Only in 2001 were the archaeologists of the Russian Naval Museum allowed by their government to search for the treasures hidden in the mysterious underground town. Did the Amber Room escape on board the German liner Wilhelm Gustloff, only to be torpedoed in the Baltic by an enemy submarine? Russian archaeologists believe that Nazis would not have risked transporting precious art objects to the dangerous waters of the Baltic Sea, where Soviet submarines lay in waiting. There are speculations that the Amber Room is hidden on the shores of the Baltic Sea. Recent finds in the area, for instance in the Lokstadt Castle, support such assumption. International treasure hunters have searched for the Amber Room, digging up cellars and at the bottom of salt mines, scouring churches and caves. They have looked in Austria, Germany, Poland, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic. Some believe that the Amber Room may still be hidden somewhere in the half-flooded caves under Kaliningrad. Several divers lost their lives trying to find out if the Nazis did bury the Amber Room somewhere in that area. Hans Stadelmann, a steadfast German researcher, believed that the Nazis had hidden the panels in the underground rooms below a building dating back to the Third Reich period in the town of Weimar. On the beaches of the Kaliningrad region, one can collect fragments of the natural amber thrown out by waves of the Baltic Sea. But the sea and its shores have been hiding their secrets quite well. In 1997, German police found one of the mosaics. The son of a former German officer who had accompanied the Amber Room on its way to Koenigsberg during the war was selling the piece to his lawyer. It was a panel measuring 55 by 74.5 centimeters, depicting two couples lounging in a garden with their dogs. Apparently, the man was a truck driver for the German army and took the panel in 1941 as his convoy was bombed. After the recovery, the panel was gifted to Russia. The history of the new Amber Room, at least, is known for certain. The reconstruction began in 1979 at Tsarskое Selo and was completed 25 years later at the cost of $11 million. The more than 2 decades of work that went into restoring the masterpiece was an enormous undertaking. The only pictures actually that existed of the Amber Room were black and white. So in order to achieve the right tones, the craftsmen were obliged to photograph the shards of amber, and then they had to compare painstakingly, quite thorough, the shades to the original photos until they were sure that the match was perfect. capturing the varying levels of the layered amber and the etchings was much more difficult. And the Russians were involved too. The Leningrad Institute for Mining and Geomechanics provided the answer by creating spatial images using a special technique called photogrammetry that showed the heights and depths up to less than a millimeter, resulting in a sort of topographical map of the room. But now completely reconstructed to match its former glory. The Amber Room was opened by Russian President Vladimir Putin and the German Chancellor at the time, Gerhard Schroeder. And it was during the celebrations marking the 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg, 2003. But the treasure hunters are still looking for the original room and the dark secrets linked to its disappearance. Now, let's look at the occult secrets of Koenigsberg and Kaliningrad. When the city was territory of the Nazi Reich, a secret, sinister research had been undertaken there by those who had directly served Erich Koch. As we know, he was the former Gauleiter Ober, president for Eastern Prussia, governor of Nazi-occupied territories, and a mass murderer. Erich Koch's treatment of the people living in the territories was cruel. And of course, he wanted to put in the instructions of his Führer. After the war, Koch was hiding from justice under a false name. He was found in 1959, as I mentioned, and was sentenced to death. Due to his bad health, he was kept in prison until he died in 1986. And he did take a number of secrets to his grave. Russian historian Sergei Trifonov, well known in Kaliningrad for his research, has collected documents and factual information about a secret Nazi laboratory called Koenigsberg's 13. Some of his findings were reported in the Russian media. There was a special military research center involved in the study of ancient metaphysical disciplines, astrology, magic, hypnosis, and various cults. Its other goal was the creation of a psychotropic weapon through practical research. The weapon was to be of an Eastern, as an Asian Orient type. Trifonov did not mention if he knew of the center's ties with the nefarious Annenberg SS. This organization was founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935 for the purpose of proving the superiority of Germans through scientific experiments. Headed by Dr. Rascher, Nazi doctors murdered Jews, Germans, Russians, and Poles through freezing and high-altitude experiments, and by poisoning them to collect their skulls. From its very foundation, the evil society concerned itself with esoteric, mostly pseudo-scientific subjects. Most of this revolved about German ancient history and myths. We can only assume that the ties between the two entities existed. Hitler and his underlings delved into demonology and pagan rituals. They worshipped the occult, collected ancient writings and symbols. They left their traces all over the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, where I'm from. Trifonov has numerous documented testimonies about runic warriors or black devoted ones, as Koch, who had participated in old Teutonic rituals, labeled them. The rituals symbolized their unwavering dedication to the struggle against the enemy and perpetual continuation of their kind. Therefore, creation of a secret laboratory to implement the research into practical solutions was all but inevitable. According to the Russian historian, when the Soviets defeated Reich's armies in Eastern Prussia, they sent captured archives to the United States. More exactly, they traded documents for machinery and other goods. Although we know that the Soviet Union had received much help from the United States and allies to the so-called Lend-Lease program. But that's what Trifonov says. He was not able to learn when the laboratory Koenigsberg 13 was actually created. Its very existence remained a top secret. Trifonov was able to find an interesting entry in a diary of one of the city's residents. As the man strolled around in the evening on the island of Kneiphof, he met Buddhist monks dressed in white and red clothes. This story echoes later Red Army accounts of dead Tibetans who were found wearing SS uniforms in Berlin after its fall in 1945. This was reported by Russian newspapers in the 1990s, but I have read other accounts, a number of them, by quite credible sources, such as Mikhail Demidenko, the Soviet writer who was fluent in Chinese and had very deep connections to the army. Now, Russian newspapers mentioned that the Tibetans were invited to Berlin by former General Karl Haushofer, whose geopolitics influenced the thinking of the key Third Reich leaders. Haushofer traveled extensively and studied in the Orient. He translated Buddhist and Hindu texts. He was intrigued by Asian symbols and cults. He had a lifelong interest in magic and mysticism, and believed he possessed precognition powers. A university professor fluent in Japanese, Russian, French, English, Korean, and Chinese, he was a person with supposedly close ties to Hitler and Rudolf Hess. Haushofer fell out of favor after his son was involved in an anti-Hitler plot. Albert Haushofer was executed by the SS or SD in April of 1945. After the war, Karl Haushofer, who denied his strong influence on the Nazi regime, became a witness against Rudolf Hess, and then he committed suicide in 1946 in a traditional Japanese ceremony of seppuku. He cut his abdomen, disemboweling himself with a Japanese short sword. Remembered Georg Stein from the Amber Room incident and quest. According to Trifonov, Nazis chose the site for their laboratory very carefully. The Russian historian collected some scant information about the pre-war origins of the laboratory, the ideas that led to its creation and its alleged operations. In 1929, an East Prussian journalist who made snide remarks about Führer's poor speaking skills in front of a local audience paid dearly for her bravery. Hitler, who had a bad cold, promised to gain control of Koenigsberg, and this is what I guess she mocked. Several days after the speech, a pleasant young man presented her a chocolate bar as a sign of deep respect. During the lunch hour, in front of many people, the young woman bit into the chocolate bar. They witnessed in horror that she was actually biting on a piece of glass. It even sounded like the glass was being broken. Although blood was streaming out, the demented woman could not stop chewing. A note was found on her desk the next day. It read, "Let him have the city." Trifonov wanted to know, was this a case of Nazis using hypnosis against their opponents? But here's what the Russian historian did not know about Koenigsberg. In 1920, the city's police chief, Lubring, forbade sale of anti-Semitic newspapers because they encouraged provocation and pogroms against the Jews. In 1924, Lubring was able to prevent Hitler from even speaking in Koenigsberg. When the Nazi Gauleiter Erich Koch arrived in 1928, the police lost control over the Nazi thugs. Later, Nazis won the elections for the city council, and terror was unleashed against Jews and other undesirables. It is not hard to guess fate of the brave German police chief. However, I was not able to find out any further information about him. But it looks that even in 1929, Nazis faced some opposition and had to crush it by all means. Darkness fell on the ancient city, and evil forces ruled its destiny. One of the leading experts from the laboratory, Hans Schur, a well-known German psychic, even prior to the Nazi regime, was too accurate in his predictions. He predicted in the early 1940s that the Third Reich would disappear. He also predicted that Koenigsberg would fall after 3 days in April of 1945. No one believed him at the time he made the prediction. When in March of 1945 the Red Army troops were advancing in East Prussia, Schur was executed for his predictions. Nazis tore off his runic medallion from the corpse. Trifonov claims that the medallion is still around. The laboratory, according to the Russian researcher, was located in 4 buildings. During the war, the city was subjected to massive bombings by British Air Force, and in August of 1944, napalm was used against it. During the nights of the 27th and the 30th of that month, the Royal Air Force dropped about 40,000 of air bombs, but the British were not able to destroy Koenigsberg 13, although Trifonov believes London knew the nature of the site they tried to bomb into oblivion. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant from the 18th century, a renowned philosopher, is the city's most famous former resident. His grave is located beside the cathedral, and 2 rooms in the cathedral museum are dedicated to his life and work. The cathedral, which reflects 7 centuries of German history, was heavily damaged by British bombing in August of 1944 and was left in ruins for many years. But the infamous laboratory located, according to Trifonov, not far from the cathedral, was impervious to the British bombs. It was the Red Army that destroyed the buildings that housed the infamous research institution. But were they able to destroy the evil that housed in those buildings? On April 9 of 1945, the German garrison of Koenigsberg surrendered to the 3rd Belarusian Front armies. General Lasch and tens of thousands of German soldiers were taken prisoner. He signed the order to surrender in his office, room 13. Trifonov finds significance of this number in the name of the laboratory and said certain events related to the city's history. He says that even the number of columns on Immanuel Kant's grave is 13. We still do not know whether there had been any practical implementation of the Nazi laboratory's research, except for Trifonov's suspicions. Trifonov is of the opinion that certain knowledge and talents of its staff researchers had been used in local operations. Most likely, a number of wartime files of the British intelligence could clarify the matter, as would those archives traded to the United States, if it happened. It has been also reported in the Russian newspapers in the 1990s that after the Red Army crossed into Germany, special units of the NKVD quietly transported to the USSR the so-called occult secrets of the Reich. Allegedly, no researcher has studied them as yet, although I find it hard to believe, but there's been more than one source that mentioned it. But bureaucracy is bureaucracy. So, there are other secrets of the last World War that are embedded in the soil of Eastern Europe. And I hope to present new videos about them. Please subscribe to my channel and share it. Thank you.